Patterson. So I would first like to just introduce our two speakers on the topic, and then we'll start in a minute. Gerri Patterson has served as Director of Education and Israel Programs of the Memphis Jewish Federation since 1996. She's a graduate of the Hebrew University of Israel. She has worked in numerous Jewish organizations at the agencies in New York, Dallas, Oklahoma, and Memphis as a Jewish communal professional for over 30 years. And now she's going to speak today on the Jewish community of Memphis, Tennessee. And our second presentation is going to be given by Rachel Baker, who is a research assistant here with us. She has an undergraduate degree from the University of Texas at Austin, and currently she is studying at the Hebrew University's Radford International School and MA in Jewish Civilization. So, the floor is then yours.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me, and thanks to everybody for coming. I think you can hear from my accent that I'm not originally from Memphis, and the first time that I met somebody from Memphis who was Jewish, my response was, I couldn't imagine that there were Jews in Memphis. And so as fate would have it, I'm now intimately aware of the Jewish community of Memphis since I've been working at the Federation for 12 years. Most people, when they think about Memphis, Tennessee, think about Graceland, which is allegedly the second most visited house in the United States after the White House. The other claims to fame, the National Civil Rights The National Civil Rights Museum is in Memphis because you may remember that Martin Luther King was assassinated at the Lorraine Hotel in Memphis, and a Civil Rights Museum, quite an impressive museum, was built on the site of the assassination. The general population of Memphis is about 1 million people, of whom 60% are African American and 1% are Jewish, about 8,000 to 10,000 Jews. And interestingly, the Jewish population of Memphis has not changed. In 1998, I was doing a research project about the 50 years of Israel and 50 years of Memphis, and so we went back and looked at what the population of Memphis had been in 1938, and it was 8,000 to 10,000. And it was the same in 1998, and it remains the same today, which is kind of an interesting phenomenon. It's not one of the growth cities like Dallas or Phoenix, Minneapolis. Okay, yeah. But it also isn't a declining city, of which Memphis has had a lot of incoming people, which I will explain. And then, we'll get back to that.
And then we have questions after discussion.
But the new populations, there are new populations in Memphis, among whom are the Asians and Hispanics, and the fastest growing new population in Memphis is the Muslims, and there are now 10,000 Muslims. So within the past, I would say 5 years, the number of Muslims have come to be similar to the number of Jews in Memphis. Just very briefly, for people who aren't familiar with the history of Jews in the South, the first Jews came to Memphis around the 1830s or 40s when there was a large, significant immigration of Jews to the United States from Germany, primarily. They were not Orthodox Jews, and many of them simply became peddlers and then came to places where they stopped and set up dry goods stores. So not just in Memphis, but prior to Memphis, I lived in Stillwater, Oklahoma, very, very small town, 35,000 people, and on Main Street, Stillwater, Oklahoma, there was Katz's department store, from the same phenomenon of the traveling, wandering Jews. The first cemetery in Memphis came to be in 1843, the first synagogue in 1858, was a Reformed congregation. First Orthodox synagogue in 1862, Bethel Emes, which actually is still in existence today. So also an interesting phenomenon. During the Civil War, people find it very interesting to know the Jews of Memphis were basically loyal to their community. However, when there were wounded Union soldiers, the Jews helped them out. And so the Jews kind of crossed paths with their loyalties, shall we say. And it feels that the areas of occupation that the Jews of Memphis were in traditionally, and to a great sense remain in today, dry goods, as I said, cotton, and banking. From 1881 to World War I, of course, there was a very, very large immigration of Jewish people to the United States, and that's when the Yiddish-speaking population came to Memphis, and many of them actually came through Galveston, which was a unique phenomenon around 1911 to 1913 when some of the boats that were headed for Ellis Island came around through the south and got into the Galveston port. There's a writer originally from Memphis, a fiction writer named Stephen Stern. I think he's at Syracuse, and he writes about that old Jewish community of Memphis that was located downtown in a neighborhood called the Pinch, which was the Yiddish-speaking first generation from Europe. And subsequently, the Jews of Memphis have moved east. And from the 1920s or 30s on, the population has remained stagnant at 8 to 10,000. The infrastructure of Memphis is very interesting because it really bespeaks a community much, much larger than we are. There are 7 synagogues right now, the newest being a conservative one that broke off from the old conservative synagogue. There are 3 day schools, there are 3 Jewish preschools, a Jewish community center, Jewish family service, assisted living facility, a home for senior citizens, a foundation, and a federation. But were you to come and visit Memphis without knowing the population and see the nature of the buildings, I think one would be impressed and think that there are far larger numbers of people, Jewish people, supporting these institutions. There's also a Judaic Studies program at the University of Memphis, an endowed chair, which happens to be held by my husband, who will be here in a week and a half. Really, it's a very, very strong Jewish community. The breakdown is about 50% Reform, 40% Orthodox, and 10% conservative. There's a lot of overlap because there's intermarriage between the congregations, and so people will remain, they may choose to go to one or the other, but remain attached to the one that their family came from. But the really interesting phenomenon is the affiliation rate is at about 90%. And that is something that you don't see in large cities. When I say affiliation rate, just let me clarify, membership in synagogues, membership at the Jewish Community Center, a child who participates in a Jewish youth program like BBYO. It's enormous. It's an enormous, and you can't, a Jew doesn't hide in Memphis. Interestingly, because there's other Memphians at the table, I have to be very careful about what I'm saying here. But yeah, we suspect, when I say that it's 8,500 or to 10,000, we suspect that there are Jews that we don't know about who have moved because of FedEx or other large companies, but we will. Because invariably you see somebody with the shopping cart, and if there's a kosher item, you start talking to them and you find out, and then right away they become connected to the community. The Federation campaign, people are interested in the kind of campaign, and the Federation in general very much reflects the values of the Memphis Jewish community, which I will explain in a moment. The campaign is about $3.2 million a year, and that represents about 2,000 gifts. And like everywhere else, the small percentage represents the largest gift. During the Israel Emergency Campaign in 2006, when the Second Lebanon War broke out, not out of almost 1,000 gifts, 939 gifts, they raised $1.8 million, over half the total campaign, which is huge. And that show of support for Israel is another very unique facet of Memphis, which, as I said, reflects the Jewish community. The Orthodox community in Memphis is very, very much involved in the Federation. which is not common in other cities in the United States. As a result of the Orthodox support for Israel, Memphis Jewish Federation is one of I think, three last federations that maintain what we call the 50-50 split. The 50-50, for those who don't know, that means that when we allocate the funds that come into the annual campaign, 50% stay in the local community to support the local, the JCC, the home, and the scholarships for the schools, and the other 50% basically goes overboard. It's actually, after operating expenses, is 42% of the campaign, and that is divided between the Joint Distribution Committee and the Jewish Agency for Israel. Another reflection of the commitment to Israel is the fact that our federation is very specific about, or I shouldn't say the federation, the lay leadership is very specific about the fact that that our funds have to be funneled through those two agencies, because they are designated by the United Jewish Community as the partner agencies in North America. The way that the Federation supports Israel, in addition to what goes on in the annual campaign, is through an Israel-directed endowment. And that, too, I think, represents the values of the committee. The endowment chooses, it breaks down into three sections. The first one would be bringing Memphis to Israel, and that represents subsidies for Jewish Memphians who want to come to Israel on a federation or congregational trip, and we will pay up to almost 50% of the cost of their trip. And of course, there is an expectation that they will make a contribution to the annual campaign, but it is nowhere near the amount of the subsidy to bring Jews to Israel. Teen Israel programs, any organized Teen Israel program, whether it's through one of the religious movements or Young Judea, those are subsidized by $2,500, which represents at least 50% the cost of many of the programs. College subsidies we also cover, so that there's a tremendous effort on the part of the leadership of the community to get a lot of Jews to Israel. The next category that we break down into is Israel to Memphis, which would be your son. We have, for a community of 8,500 to 10,000, there are 14 shlichim operating in various capacities in Memphis. About 8 of them teaching in a kollel at the Orthodox Jewish Day School, and then in other schools, and then in congregations. So once again, there's a tremendous interaction of Israel to Memphis. And there is an Israel scholar at the University of Memphis, which, apropos of the Israel Studies talk that Dr. Bard gave a couple of weeks ago. Memphis also funds specific projects in Israel. We don't have a specific community like a Partnership 2000, but we do choose projects throughout the country with which we feel we can establish a connection. The Israel advocacy in Memphis is extremely strong. Finally, the topic that I wanted to touch on is the Christian community, and most specifically the evangelical community, because we have a very, very strong relationship with the evangelical community. Memphis is in the Bible Belt. And around 1997, the Federation was approached by a number of evangelical Christians who said that they were forming an organization called Christian Friends for Israel, and they wanted to raise funds to buy an ambulance that they would be donating to Israel through Magen David Adom, but on the ambulance it would say in honor of the Jewish community of Memphis. And they did that. They raised over $50,000 for Israel at 50, and they maintained their organization to this day. And in fact expanded, and next week I will be accompanying on a mission, JCPA, the other JCPA, the Jewish Council for Public Affairs, which comes out of New York. I'll be accompanying a publisher of a magazine called Main Street Journal, which is published in Memphis specifically for Christians of Memphis who support Israel. So the fact that there is a monthly publication, which is really quite sophisticated, specifically targeting that population, I think is emblematic of the nature of the community and the amount of support that they lend us. It's interesting that we don't always agree with them. Certainly we don't always agree with them politically, but even with regard to what they want to do for the Jewish community, we don't always agree with them. An example of this would be that a number of years ago, the Christian Friends of Israel approached the Federation and said that they wanted to make a Holocaust museum. The Jews of Memphis, the Federation does not want a Holocaust museum in Memphis, simply because we feel like there are a lot of Holocaust museums around the United States, and for us to have a significant one would just be something that we could not afford to do. So while the Christians wanted to do it, the Jews discouraged them from pursuing that project and asked them to please continue to show their brotherhood through their support for Israel, which they have done and continue to do. Mainstream Protestants are not as close to Israel as I'm sure many of you know. They're much more inclined to be liberal and very sympathetic with the Palestinian cause. The phenomenon of the Sabeel Center, which David Parsons spoke about, is something that we deal with in Memphis. That is the Palestinian roadshow that comes in to show how Palestinians and mainstream Christians have an affinity to each other, and the Jews don't participate. With regard to the Muslim population, for the most part, I have to say it's really quite benign. They live in their own part of the city and really aren't active except for occasional situations during the Intifada and during the Second Lebanon War, and on the campus. And I can speak to the fact that on the campus they do bring in university programs that are really, really toxic. There's a Dr. Mark Lance from Georgetown who has a PowerPoint presentation that's absolutely devastating. Fortunately, because our community, the Memphis Jewish community, is so strong, when we knew that Mark Lance was coming, we bombarded our population with emails. There were about 30 to 40 Muslims in the audience that night and about 300 Jews, and Dr. Lance really didn't get very far in the question and answer period. So the other thing that is interesting is that when the Muslims do choose to demonstrate, they always do it late Friday afternoon. Somehow they must know that it's very hard for Jews to get a group together late Friday afternoon to counter-demonstrate. And so there's some I don't want to say wisdom to their thinking, but it's very shrewd, let's say. But for the most part, there really isn't there is no dialogue between the Muslim and Jewish community, but nor is there any kind of animosity. And that, I think, sums up pretty much the lay of the land, and I invite questions.
Thank you very much. Justice and Michael, we go together.
One point and two quick questions. Point is, we at the JCPA published a monograph on the suffering of the Arab Christians at the hands of the PA. We're now looking for help in reissuing it, in updating it. You might want to talk to me about that. The two questions are, is it not true that the second in command of the Confederacy, a Jew by the name of
Judah Benjamin,
was from Memphis, or?
No, I think he was from Charleston.
Charleston.
Yeah. Okay. I'm pretty sure.
But he basically ran the Confederacy. Yeah. Jefferson Davis was like a figurehead.
Yeah.
And I once, a long time ago, read somewhere that Elvis was Jewish.
That is not true. Although there is a Jewish star on somewhere in Graceland, and he wore one. he had a very, very bold Jewish start. He was very philanthropic, and that included the Jewish community. And he was somebody's Shabbos goy, if you will excuse the expression, but he really was. He was outfitted by Lansky Brothers, Jewish concern, and I must say as an aside that when I first moved to Memphis, I moved there in August of 1996, and I had no understanding that Elvis passed away on August 20th. Once you live in Memphis, that's a date that you can't forget. The week of his yahrzeit, shall I say, people come on a pilgrimage to Graceland and parade in a kind of vigil with candles in the evenings, and this was on the evening news the first week that I moved to Memphis. And I turned around to my husband and I said, what kind of place have we moved to? But fortunately that phenomenon only occurs on his birthday and on his yahrzeit, so the rest of the year it's just regular traffic to Graceland.
His birthday is the 8th of January, 1938.
Thank you. I guess you're an Elvis fan. Have you been to Graceland?
No, I'm not a She was born 2 days my twin sister.
And my mother.
I can tell you something about Elvis. Very, very simple. That my rabbi in Shore, New York, many, many years ago, was his next door neighbor in Memphis. And the rabbi used to play these Yiddish records. And Elvis loved Yiddish records. He used to come off and listen to them. So that's part of the Shema.
Yes. Well, I actually also have one comment. First of all, comment. The fact that Muslims demonstrate late Friday afternoon is probably also connected to the fact that it's their day of prayer, and so if a Muslim goes to prayer, he goes to prayer on Friday, and in the afternoon when he's done, it's a natural time to congregate to demonstrate.
They can do so at noon too. I think they skip late Friday.
They work on Friday too.
And that's the question. First of all, you say 90% of the Jews in Memphis are affiliated. Is this, you think, connected to the general level of affiliation in Memphis? I mean, you said that it's in the Bible Belt. Are the Jews more affiliated because the local population as a whole is more affiliated, or is it something else that makes them so affiliated?
That's a very interesting question. I don't know how you measure affiliation in other communities, but yes, I think it's a very strong religiously affiliated community. I think it's a very, very big church-going community. Absolutely. The black churches are very strong. The African American churches, COGIC, which is one of the very, very large black organizations, has their annual conference in Memphis. It's stronger among the older generation than the younger in the African American community. Certainly in the evangelical community, they're a church-going community. But when I talk about our affiliation, it's not necessarily going to religious services.
Right. That's belonging to
yes, but it can be it's manifested in any number of ways, including working out. You choosing to run on the treadmill at the JCC as opposed to another facility.
But it's kind of to go to the gym, you join a religious organization.
Well, no, the JCC is not religious, but it is closed on Saturday. Okay. And we're one of the last communities that still keeps the JCC closed on Saturday. Most others have, there's a lot of pressure to open it up. There's tremendous pressure. The Orthodox, I can't stress enough that one of the unique facets of Memphis is the influence of the Orthodox community on the general community. And that is because they're very active, they're very philanthropic. They don't isolate themselves, but they are really quite strong in their participation in all facets of Jewish communal life.
Okay. That's my last question. It's really a quick information question because I don't know anything about Memphis.
Well, you have to come and visit.
I think they have to in August.
Yeah, for sure.
8,000 Jews, you say. So, but Memphis as a whole is growing, I think.
No.
No, I mean, no, the general population.
No, and no.
Oh,
no.
so the percentage-wise, the Jews remain the same still.
Yes, but Memphis is not a growth city. It's
Not at any level.
no, it really does not attract large corporations other than FedEx and International Paper. When the boom was coming, the boom years in the 70s and 80s, and people were moving to Houston and Dallas and all kinds of other cities out of New York and Chicago, Memphis had nothing to offer. It's very inexpensive to live in Memphis compared to other places. It's got a very high crime rate, I'm very sorry to say, which has increased exponentially over the past 3 months. Yeah, I'm getting a lot of feedback from friends of mine that in East Memphis, which is the upper middle class community area where most of the Jewish population resides, the amount of burglaries has increased by 90% since last year. Yeah.
No reason for that?
I would say probably the economic crisis is causing